Hello, this is Jack Fend, president of the Civil War Study Group here at Lake of the Woods, Virginia. Welcome to this recording of our program on May 21, 2026. Good evening. I'm Jack Fend, your host for tonight and the president of the Civil War Study Group. And I hope you've enjoyed your evening as much as I have. I'm standing here at the podium now to introduce to you our speaker for the evening, John Hennessy. From 1995 until his federal retirement in 2021, John Hennessy was the chief historian and head of interpretation at Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania Military Parks, one of the three most visited NPS Civil War sites in the nation. John is one of our region's most popular Civil War historians, speakers, and authors, and the Civil War Study Group is proud to have him here as our featured speaker this evening on the eve of the Memorial Weekend. John's talk tonight is titled Witnessing War, Letters and Diaries. John had a distinguished 40-year career with the Park Service, beginning at Manassas National Battlefield, producing his definitive volume, Return to Bull Run, The Campaign and Battle of Second Manassas, and he remains the unchallenged authority on those events. There's much to say about John Hennessy's contributions to our nation's history, but I will simply add that every one of us will leave here tonight having more positive hopes for our nation's future and a greater appreciation for the sacrifices made to save it this Memorial Weekend. John?
The American Civil War in this region, and especially in the Fredericksburg region. There is nothing universal about what you're going to hear tonight. The motivations of one person do not speak to the cause for which they fought necessarily. The perspectives of one people don't always align with the purpose of the nation that they serve. So it's an unobjective and narrow view. In this case, especially so, most civilian diarists of the Civil War were middle or, more commonly, upper class women. Almost all white women. There are no diaries from enslaved people or people of color in this region that I am aware of from the Civil War period. And really only a few distant memoirs from enslaved people that we have. And just bear in mind that enslaved people had a slightly different perspective on this war than what you're going to hear tonight. And also bear in mind that half of the population in the community in which we live today was enslaved in 1860. Half. 60% in Spotsylvania. So we often look back at our history and we wonder, well, what would I have done? Or how would I have felt about that? And I think, we are kind of experiencing a period of national troubles right now. I think we can all agree there's a little turmoil in our country. And so we're all kind of experiencing something historic as we live our lives today. But sometimes I think it's helpful to look back and see what other people experienced, because you know what? Their worlds were different, but they were not radically different from what we are. Their values, what they cared about, what they aspired to was often very similar to what we have. Now, truthfully, most diaries are really mundane. One of the best diarists in the region is this woman, Jane Howison Beale, very well known. She started her diary in 1850 and gradually dropped it over time. But here's an entry from her on September 3rd, 1850. Spent part of the day greening pickles, cutting out work, cleaning lamps, learning lessons to the children, superintending the cleaning of the yards and whitewashing part of the house, paring peaches, mending clothes, cleaning bedsteads of insects, seeing the cow milked and fed, nursing the baby, and after putting the children to bed, sat down to knit and talk to Sam about how my own and his plans are for the winter will be. Now that's an exciting day. And most diaries are like that. Even soldier diaries in the Civil War commonly consist of weather, food, letters, boxes. There's not a lot in most diaries about what people are thinking or feeling. But when events around you compel, people start expressing and trying to figure out what they think and what they feel. And when we have diarists that help, that write things down, it helps us tremendously. What these events meant to them, not to everybody, but to them. And so these are the things we're going to look at. We're just going to look at several aspects of the war in this region through the eyes of a handful of women who wrote about them. And I would say to you, we would not have heard of any of these women if not for the American Civil War, because we would not have the interest to read their diaries. And in fact, several of them only started to write diaries because the war engulfed this community. Matilda Hamilton, who I'm going to talk about a lot tonight. The diary has not been published. There are scraps of it around, but it's an immense diary, incredibly important, that I've been working on for the last year. Remarkable stuff. Some of it you've seen quoted here and there, but not much of it. And we'll talk a lot about Matilda. She lived near Hamilton's Crossing, just outside of Fredericksburg, at a place called Forest Hill. And on the 28th of November, her diary for the war begins on the 25th of November, 1862, so about 3 weeks before the Battle of Fredericksburg. And she lived right near the northernmost stop on the railroad for much of the war in our region, on the railroad between Fredericksburg and Richmond. And her house was only about 300 yards away from the little stop at Hamilton's Crossing. So she had hordes of people visiting the army who passed her house, knocked on her door, stayed at her house, tried to stay at their house. And hers is the greatest account I've ever seen that captures the chaos that war visited upon most civilians in this area. Matilda Hamilton was 45 years old, unmarried, uninterested in men, although she commented almost always on their appearance. But she had no romantic interest that she expressed, but she noticed everybody else's romantic experience. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But this is what she wrote 3 days into her war diary. She said, "When I first began my journal, some years ago," she had been writing before, "I had generally to only say I got up, went to bed, etc. Now I can scarcely write down all the incidents that occur. Like the shifting scenes of a drama, our life seems to be now. Persons coming and going all the time." When war came, the local women mobilized. This is a well-known story, and I'll not get into the details here. But the war began, of course, on April 12th, 1861. In Fredericksburg, being near the northern frontier of Virginia, at that time, early in the war, Virginians were determined to defend their border, which meant, in this area, the Potomac River, of course. And so there were troops pouring through Fredericksburg, and the local white women mobilized themselves to help. Betty Herndon Maury, who was the daughter of Matthew Fontaine Maury, so very well connected. Her diary is a different animal because she knew what was going on in a lot of different places. Nobody else that we're going to talk about did. She's interested in so many ways, an excellent diary, but like the others, none of them covered the entire war. She covers just about 18 months. She wrote in June of 61, as the first battles of the war approached. Some of the ladies here devote almost all their time to the sick. Uncle Brodie Herndon is attending some of those who are in private houses. I never saw anything like the spirit here, she said. The women give up the greater part of their time to nursing the sick and sewing for the soldiers, and it is the same case throughout the South. On July 21st, 1861, according to one source, gaggles of people gathered on the heights near Chatham, and from there they could hear the distant boom of cannons at Manassas, and everybody waited for news. Betty said, More news, more good news. The battle yesterday was one of the most more extensive than we thought. The enemy is routed, and we are in hot pursuit. Thank God, thank God. I hope it is all true. What I would not give to hear that they are now on Arlington Heights, of course, overlooking Washington. It's astonishing to me that the majority of this community that she came from in Fredericksburg, as late as 5 months earlier, was ardently in favor of remaining in the Union. But by July of 1861, they had begun a shift from being Americans to being Confederates. Now think for a minute what it would require for all of us, no matter our political views, to start thinking of ourselves as anything but Americans. It's almost inconceivable today. And yet the white people, most of them in this community, embraced the label Confederate. Jane Beale, the Battle of Manassas inspired her to pick up her diary anew. She hadn't written in it in literally years. But on July 23rd, she picked up her diary to start writing. She had sons in the Army, and she wrote, "After a night of miserable suspense, I was relieved by a telegram from my dear brother stating that my dear boys were in the hottest of the fight, but escaped unhurt. And the tide of joyous gratitude swelled to overflowing in my heart. We have great confidence in the wisdom of our leaders and in the bravery of our soldiers and in the justice of our cause. We do not fear the final result of this war." But of course, Virginians had wagered everything on this war. I mean, think about what they risked collectively in secession and by choosing the Confederacy and thus war. Now, war very quickly, as we all know in our own lifetimes, becomes drudgery. It fades from the front pages. Now, I won't say that this war ever faded from the front pages, but it did become routine and drudgery. And it became more of a distant reality for those in Fredericksburg as the armies concentrated at Manassas and other places. But still, it had an effect here. Betty here in Maury wrote in April of '62, said, "We've been without butter for several days. It's impossible to get any. We never see a piece of silver, however small, and are reduced to all sorts of devices to make change. I bought a spool of cotton the other day. It cost 37.5 cents. I gave the shopman a $half, and he handed me in change 2 5-cent stamps in a row of pins." For white residents, the gloom of war would descend on the town with the arrival of the Union Army on April 18, 1862. One woman ran out to the riverside and waved a skull and bones, black skull and bones flag at the Union Army as it arrived. Helen Bernard, who was up in the upper left-hand corner, lived in a house called Beaumont, which stood right where Gold's Gym is today, or right next to where Gold's Gym is today on Route 3. She wrote on Good Friday, 1862, "The enemy are in possession of Falmouth. Our force on this side is too weak to stop and resist them. But we are not at all frightened, but stunned and bewildered. Will our homes on the river be destroyed? It is heart-sickening to think of having our beautiful valley that we have so loved and admired all overrun and desolated by our bitter enemies whose sole object is to subjugate and plunder the South." Now I'm going to depart from a diary to share with you a letter written by the youngest chronicler of the American Civil War that I've ever encountered. Her name was Sophia Downman. She lived at a place called Idlewild, and she was 8 years old. And she wrote to one of her cousins about the Yankee occupation of the Fredericksburg region. She said, "Dear Maggie, as I can write, I thought I would write you. The Yankees behaved very rudely. They broke open the meat house." This girl is 8. My daughter is very smart, but she was not writing like this at 8 years old. "The Yankees behaved very rudely. They broke open the meat house and took all the meat but 4 pieces. They killed 2 of the cattle right before our eyes. You must write to me and tell me about your school and what you are doing. Give my love to Emma and tell her she must write to me. I have a big rag baby. I can undress her and dress her too. When you write to me, you must tell me about your hens and chickens. I have a hen sitting. You and Emma must come and see me." It's an 8-year-old. Now, the women of the region and across the South felt that they had an absolute role in resisting Union occupation. And that was through gesture, words, and as much as they could accomplish it, annoyance of the Yankees. And there was a minister in the Union Army who wrote home to his hometown newspaper. He said, "The ladies hereabouts will swear," he said. "With my unsophisticated northern notions, I had supposed that profanity was an accomplishment confined to the manly sex, but apparently not." Another soldier recorded that the women here, and I quote, "gave us invitations to kiss them in locations that I have never thought of applying that token."
Oh my gosh.
Now, these are the Alsop sisters, as you're looking at this picture on the left-hand side. That is Lizzie Alsop, one of the great diarists. Her diary is unpublished, held by the Virginia Museum of History and Culture in Richmond. She holds two distinctions. She was by far the most eloquent hater of Yankees among the diarists and probably in Fredericksburg. She practiced it like an art. And she is also clearly an immense flirt, but we'll get into more of that later. Her writings about courtship make her diary one of the greatest sources I've seen on 19th century courtship. But her real forte was hating Yankees. Just weeks after the Yankees arrived in Fredericksburg in the spring of 1862, she said, "We Confederates are, generally speaking, the most cheerful people, but we treat the Yankees with silent contempt. They little know the hatred in our hearts toward them, the great scorn we entertain for them." She wrote later, "I never hear or see of a Federal riding down the street that I don't wish that his neck may be broken before he crosses the bridge." Jane Beale was a little bit more practical about hating Yankees and overcame her aversion to them, at least enough to buy their goods. She wrote, "I do not admire naked martyrdom, so we abuse the Yankees to our heart's content and buy their goods still," she said. Now, we often think the tradition in this area is that the greatest impact of the war on this region was physical. The destruction of buildings in Fredericksburg, probably about 25% of the buildings in Fredericksburg were damaged or destroyed during the war, seriously damaged or destroyed. But by far, the greatest impact on this community from the Civil War was the end of slavery. And white residents knew right away that it was ending wherever the Union Army went. This is a scene not too far from here. On the other side, up the Rappahannock River, just below Remington. In fact, the railroad bridge you see in the background is still out in that same location across the river at Remington. So the security of slavery depended precisely or entirely on the location of the Union Army at this time of war. At this point, no Emancipation Proclamation, but enslaved people decided to emancipate themselves with their feet. And they did it by the thousands. There was lots of unrest. Betty Herndon Morey wrote, "The Negroes are going off in great numbers and beginning to be very independent and impertinent. I am afraid of the Yankees, lawless Yankee soldiers, but that is nothing to fear of the Negroes should they rise against us." Later on, she recorded in her diary, or earlier she recorded in a diary that just struck me the first time I saw it. She's writing of the absence of her enslaved servants, as she called them. And she left this note in her diary. She said, I made Nanny Bell, her 5-year-old daughter, a rag baby last night. She is more delighted with it than with the finest wax doll. And then she said, it is the first time I ever took the time or trouble to devote an hour solely to her amusement. This girl was 5 years old. And of course, the reason she had never attended to her child was because someone else did it for her. I still stand in amazement of that. If you don't think the American Civil War had something significant to do with the institution of slavery, you have not read what people wrote and said at the time. You could not have, if someone sat down, if you sat down with someone from Fredericksburg or Jefferson Davis in 1862 and said, you know, slavery, they would look at you and say, you're wrong. It was. It was a huge deal. It wasn't the only deal, but it was a huge deal. Jane Beale is one of our best sources on the disruption of slavery and the end of slavery here. She wrote on June 1st, 62, the Federal Army has abolished slavery wherever it has gone. And certainly, if their design was to punish us by subjecting us to every inconvenience and indignity which an entire rupture of our domestic relations is certain to produce, they have succeeded. Many families are left without the help they have been accustomed to. There's one diary entry that Matilda did that recorded one of her friends complaining to her that she now had to churn the butter for the first time in her life. Now, of course, the greatest impact of, or imagined impact on the community is the loss of people who lived here. And indeed, death was omnipresent during the war. There's no way to study the death rates, but it's clear that they rose during the war, especially among older people. Matilda Hamilton in her diary is constantly reporting the death of people. And Jane Beale suffered a stinging, shattering event in May of 1862. She would write, since my last entry, my heart has been crushed by sorrow, for I have seen the death of my son, Charlie, mentioned in the Richmond newspaper, if you can imagine that. He fell in battle near Williamsburg on Monday the 5th. Sorrow has rolled in on my soul in heavy waves, but even in this great calamity, I am not left to despair. He had a quick temper and a strong will, but the spirits were subdued within the bounds of a Christian moderation. He was the best, most affectionate and dutiful of sons to his mother, and she will ever cherish his memory with the fondness which none other can possibly know. The presence of the Confederate Army, the Yankees were one thing, they were annoying. Local residents welcomed the Confederates, but you know what? Having an army live in your backyard is a little bit annoying as well. But tolerating it became something of a patriotic duty. And that the interaction with Confederate soldiers by local white women leads us a couple interesting kind of tangents here. One, of course, was when you have young men near young women, things happen. And as I mentioned, Lizzie, who I showed here as an adult, or a little bit older, certainly after the Civil War, she is our great chronicler of romance in Fredericksburg between 1863 and 1864. And not only do we have her words, but we have the words of several Confederate officers, mostly cavalrymen, who encountered her and mentioned being struck by her as well. She went to what was called a starvation party down Lower Caroline Street in December of 1863. Now, a starvation party was common. They were held here, they were held in Richmond, and that is where the host had no responsibility to provide anything. That if you wanted something, you brought it with you, but you couldn't expect to be hosted in a traditional way. Lizzie would write in her diary, I attended a starvation party last night. I had a delightful time. Captain Church engaged me to pull candy with him. Said he intended getting a private corner for us. In the course of conversation, he said that Virginia and Georgia were the greatest states in the Confederacy. He was from Georgia, of course. He said, I should like to transplant Virginia's brightest, most beautiful flower to my own state. And there, under my care and nursing, it would expand its beauty. I would prize it as a rare exotic, etc. She concluded, I am inclined to think he wishes to have a little flirtation. And I am willing, she said. But Lizzie, who was besieged by suitors, by her own account, she records all of them, and she records turning all of them away. Not with joy, and sometimes with pain. There was a walk she took in 1864 with a Captain Gregory, also from Georgia. She had known him from some time and knew that he was in love with her. He knew it. And finally, as they were walking in the cemetery, the Fredericksburg City Cemetery, the gate I'm going to mention here is still there in the cemetery. Finally, walking in the cemetery, he professed to her his love for her. Now, mind you, Lizzie was only 18 years old at the time. He said, this is quoting Lizzie, I merely said, Captain Gregory, I don't think I can, responding to his expression. And then she said, then both of us were silent for some minutes. It seemed, some of us were silent for some minutes, it seemed, and stood leaning against the heavy iron gate, I feeling as if I should be grateful if the earth would swallow me. You can imagine the awkwardness, the uncomfortableness for both of them. I saw he was agitated, and God knows I would have spared him that moment of pain if I could have done so without compromising my maiden delicacy. And every indication about Lizzie, she didn't marry till she was 27 years old. So we can only imagine at the pace that she started in 1862, there were hundreds of broken hearts across Virginia and the Confederacy by then. Now, Matilda Hamilton, remember, lived near the railroad. And I would say that you would be hard-pressed outside of Richmond to find a private home that witnessed more visitors and more famous visitors than did Matilda Hamilton and her two sisters at Forest Hill. One of her sisters, by the way, Jane, was married to John L. Marie of Brompton. They married in 1862 in the middle of the war, and so Forest Hill is often referred to as the Marie House. Now, Matilda has been Jane Connor, you know Jane Connor, a legend from Stafford County history. She is my other woman tonight. But Matilda has been brought her here, she's my date tonight. We've had a very good time. But Matilda has been my other woman for about a year and a half as I worked through her diary. She was, as I said, she's unmarried, 3 sisters, 45 years old. We have no picture of her. Now, historically, one of the things that she illustrates is to what degree people associate looks and appearances with certain individual qualities. Now, we don't do that as much today, but somewhere in our brains, when we hear about someone or read about someone, what do we want to do? We want to see what they look like, right? It's still an instinct. Well, Matilda helps us in that she describes almost everybody that she runs into. This is what she wrote just several days before the Battle of Fredericksburg, and not long after the exodus of refugees fleeing the prospect of battle began. She said, this is November 25th, since the 20th we've been in the midst of a large army. I could not tell nor write down the confusion we have been in, nor enumerate the persons we have entertained and had here at Forest Hill. People are moving and counter-moving, dying to avoid the Yankees. We are surrounded with soldiers, camps, and all the paraphernalia of war. It is so exciting, and our feelings are so above the ordinary ones that we can't tell whether it is pleasant or to the contrary. On December 11th, she would hear from her house, about 3 miles away, the sound of the guns bombarding Fredericksburg. She said, "We scarcely know how we got through this exciting day, December 11th. Persons coming and going, our army in motion, soldiers on the lookout. Mrs. John Scott, myself, and Tom," that was her nephew, "walked up the railroad to try to hear some of the news of the shelling. The roar of the cannons was unceasing. A cloud of smoke hung over the town. The greatest number of citizens in Fredericksburg were here today." That is at Forest Hill. Fair and mild. She also has a wonderful chronicler of weather. Want to know what the weather is? Check out Matilda. On the next day, the eve of battle, she wrote, "At night, a striking scene was presented. All our troops in battle array were encamped on the lawn. Every fence and gate has disappeared. The campfires, looking beautiful, studded the place like bonfires. I stood at the door and heard one party singing gay songs, and another, a graver set, preparing for battle by singing hymns and holding a prayer meeting." The next day, the family had to flee from the house. They were just a few hundred yards from Prospect Hill. Shells flew over the house. It was hit 10 times during the day. She said, "We saw as we returned from Forest Hill that night, one or two of our poor soldiers dead, wearied with the march of life. They had been wounded in the battle and had sunk down and perished on the roadside before they reached the hospital." We've all seen the films of French in France during World War II. That was Fredericksburg in 1860. That was the experience that these people were having. Her diary also often takes on kind of a staccato tone. "Christmas Day. We have never seen such a one before. Jane had desserts for us, though a poor one, only puffs. Alexander Little told us old Dr. Fernyhough died last night, was frozen to death. Jane had all her 6 turkeys stolen last night. She recovered 1. Our soldiers, though gallant, will steal. I can't remember nor write down all who came today. So many ask, and we do not like to refuse any." And so for most of the next 9 months, until the beginning of September 1863, with about a 6-week break for Gettysburg, the place was surrounded by soldiers. On February 13th, so it's around, settles into a routine, and everybody's looking for relief, amusement even, where they can find it. On February 13th, Matilda writes, "At night, Jane and Eve and I went out to the theatrical performance in the camps belonging to Jenkins' Varieties." It's Jenkins' Brigade. It was not a very elegant one. A stout soldier with immense calves to his legs and short petticoats impersonated and sang Miss Lucy Long. Death was ever present. May 9th, she writes, "A poor soldier, a right young man, died this morning about sunrise in our laundry. I had gone down to see him. Train passed, he heard it, looked up and startled and said, 'What is that?' He died a few minutes after, in perfect possession of his faculties. His groans just under us last night were most distressing. He was buried on our lawn." By June of 1863, the Army has departed for Gettysburg. Matilda was a news hound, which benefits us all. She was very well informed on what was going on and what it meant. But on this day, she said, "Sister Maria and I walked out this evening over our downtrodden, desolated fields, where lately resounded the tramp of armed men, and found the quiet oppressive. We are constantly picking up things in the now lonely and deserted encampments, pots, kettles, chairs, tablets, booklets, tables, and old letters." But 6 weeks later, the Army returned, and she said, "Our place again swarms with people. It really looks more natural now with them than without them. And when we don't mark the ravages of war so much, when camps and soldiers cover the ground." So they became not just accommodated, but almost comfortable with the environment, as hard as that is to imagine. She and her sisters, as I mentioned, encountered hundreds of people traveling from the Army. I've got a list of probably 200 or 300 that she's named by name, most of which we know in some form. They're not anonymous figures. It includes the governor of Virginia, the mayor of Richmond, who she didn't even know who he was. But a lot of things about her observations. She was, typically, very class conscious. She referred to people below her station as the plain people, over and over again. That person was plain, she said. When a soldier asked for boarding for him and his wife one night, she would report, "He is plain, uneducated, though very fine looking." She always had but she, speaking of his wife, greatly his superior, is an educated woman with very good manners. Plays well on the piano. We were interested in them because of their devotion to each other. So this kind of cross-class union was curious to her. Fortunate for us, she rarely encountered someone of note without describing them. And we're very fortunate, and the people that she encountered were people we want to hear about today. James Longstreet and his wife stayed at Forest Hill for 6 weeks in January and early February of 1862. His wife was Maria Louisa Garland, in mourning because they had lost 3 of their children to scarlet fever the winter before, in a vast scarlet fever epidemic through Virginia, one of the most devastating things that ever happened to this town. But these are her descriptions of Longstreet, most of which have never been published, at least not completely. General Longstreet is a fine-looking man, is shy or proud. So she wasn't sure why his quietude. Was he aloof or was he shy? Silent and embarrassed in manner, she said. I think I have any other pictures. The picture would be nice. January 1st, General Longstreet is about 40, is fat and florid. His light gray eyes, brown hair, is a handsome man, I think, but he looks ordinary. General Longstreet we see only at meals. He sits sometimes about our house after dinner, which is by candlelight. And on May 22nd, after Chancellorsville, General Longstreet is one of the shyest, most embarrassed men I ever saw in company. We have seen so much of him, we look upon him as our friend. But those are not the kinds of descriptions you normally see of Longstreet. Jeb Stuart came to visit. Came on January 22nd or 20th, along with D.H. Hill, another Confederate general. She writes of Stuart, "I did not admire either of them much. I liked General Stuart, but he was too undignified for me to admire him." Again, there's kind of that class thing. He is a hail fellow well met with everyone he meets. She encountered Jubal Early often, because Early's men spent about a month and a half encamped around Forest Hill. He is said to be a brave man and one of the most intelligent of all of our generals. He was a lawyer, though a graduate of West Point, but he is not popular, drinks, and is said to be very profane, very stern, and unpopular with his soldiers. Which is not radically different from a lot of descriptions you would hear. She recorded 4 visits from or with Robert E. Lee, which is really kind of extraordinary. Lee developed a fancy, as Matilda described it, for Matilda's sister, Anna Maria Hamilton Page, who was a widow. Apparently beautiful and sprightly and very popular. Matilda wrote one day with some resentment in her tone that when they went into the camps, all the officers would gather around Maria's side of the carriage, and all the enlisted men would come to her side. Not happy about that. But here are some of her encounters with Robert E. Lee. April 9th. His character, his appearance, his manners, they are very elegant. He knows how and when to unbend, which is an interesting comment. Is very lively and devoted to ladies' society. That's a comment you see often about Lee. On April 13th, General Lee called to see us today. And he did that several times, where he called to see the Hamilton sisters. He called alone, not even an orderly to hold his horse. He came in the afternoon when we were all sitting together in the parlor. There were 2 soldiers there, Frank Meade and Berkeley Minor. He said, "Frank Meade and Berkeley Minor were with us. They looked frightened into statues." So here's the commander of the army sitting in the parlor with them. Lee gave Sister Maria one of the finest lemons I ever saw. It was sent to him from Florida. She says she is going to preserve it. I'm sure she did. On the 22nd of April, she would write, in the afternoon, as we were all in the parlor, we were again honored with a visit from our admired commander-in-chief. General Lee was elegant as ever, the room full of ladies mostly, but that was a stimulant to his powers. And finally, a notable visit on May 6, 1863, the day after he completed the Battle of Chancellorsville. This has never been published, and Matilda described him extensively. May 6th, the battle is over. A great victory, they say it is, but it seems to me, Matilda says, a very distressing one. General Lee returned today, called here to see General Early. Surprised indeed, he said, to see that we were here, but he asked to see us. We entertained him in the chamber. General Lee I thought, looked decidedly dejected, this after the greatest victory of his career to this point. He said he was so disturbed when he heard Jackson was wounded that he never asked about it or how it was done. His first remark to us was, well, ladies, you are sorry to see me back. I could have wept because I saw Lee was disappointed. He had intended attacking the Yankees this morning, he told us, but they got out last night. We got him a lunch, which he seemed to enjoy, milk and bread and some preserves, and then, as he talked, he seemed to get more cheerful. But the one man that Matilda became a fangirl of was this guy, not that guy, this guy, Thomas Johnson Jackson. And the photograph that was taken the very week that Matilda's writing about here, or within 10 days or so. Her first encounter came on April 12th. Jackson's headquarters were in the valley, not far away, and he held church services there. And very rarely did the Hamiltons, who were very pious Episcopalians, go in town for church services, so they availed themselves to go to Jackson's headquarters, where Chaplain Beverly Tucker Lacey was holding services. But mind you, she had never met Jackson before and didn't know what he looked like. His visage was not known to the general public at that time. And she was curious if she could pick him out, actually. She would write, Sunday, the 12th of April, we attended church today in the camps, Jackson's headquarters, and we were introduced to Jackson. I felt very much excited. I have the most exalted admiration of him, of his character, of his genius, everything. During the service, as I knew I was probably in the presence of him, I hadn't met him yet, so I didn't know which one he was, I tried hard to compose my thoughts. After they were over, the services, I eagerly sought him out. I had always desired that I might be in his presence to see if I could not distinguish him amongst many, but my desires were not gratified. Sisters Maria and Jane had gone into his tent and been introduced. I held back, feeling as if I would be an intrusion, but at last I went in. He shook hands with me. I was most agreeably disappointed in his person. But she didn't mean that as an insult. She said, I had heard him described looking like a red fox, as having the eye of a menial, or looking like a monkey on horseback. But he is decidedly interesting, if not handsome in his appearance. A slight figure, blue eyes, very young for his age, which I hear is 39. He has an embarrassed, diffident manner. As a little deaf, is as remarkable for his piety as for his bravery. The next week, she watched him, knowing who he was now, at services at his headquarters. Now, knowing Jackson, I had the pleasure of looking at him all the time of the preaching. He listened without moving or looking away from Mr. Lacey's face. His eyelids only winked rapidly. My admiration has increased since I have seen him because of his intensity of appearance. So you can imagine her reaction upon his wounding and death. And she would learn of his death within hours of it happening. Sunday, May 10th, bright and sunny overhead, and dark and memorable day to us. Stonewall Jackson died today at 3:30. Our hitherto invincible hero lies conquered of death. Alas, he was not restored to our prayers. At night we sang hymns. It sounded like a requiem. We sang God moves in mysterious ways. How appropriate it seems to us in the death of Jackson. The parlor and hall were covered with sleepers, that is, people sleeping, and every room full. How gloomy the Battle of Chancellorsville will always seem to me. And she never let up on that. For Matilda and her sisters, at this busy place at Forest Hill, the war was a succession of goodbyes. August 24th, she said, the house is full all the time. Like the shifting scenes of a drama, first one group and then another present themselves, appear, talk, perform their parts, then exit, and we see them no more. Our lives are made up of partings. August 8th, she said, we part with our friends now as those do who think they may never meet again. Now, after the Battle of Gettysburg, palpable pessimism creeps into Matilda's writing. Pessimism might not be the right word, discouragement. She never lost hope so far as we know. In fact, none of the diarists that we know who wrote into 1864 and 65 ever lost hope. To the very end. In fact, they didn't believe some of them. Appomattox had actually happened. But slowly, the reality came home. News of Appomattox arrived in Spotsylvania County on April 11, 1865. Eliza French, who was Lizzie Alsop's aunt, lived at Sunnyside, described it in her diary. I hear 1,000 rumors, feel sad. Our noble and good general-in-chief surrendered to the enemy on this night. It's hard to believe. Oh, my heart will surely break after all we have endured, to lose our best of causes, to be in subjugation to the enemy. When, after Lee surrendered, Lizzie also would write, General Lee has surrendered, I pray God that I may yet live to see his vengeance exercised against our enemies. And there were many who felt the same way. But by May 1865, Lizzie wrote thus. Home. She was writing in the window seat of her bedroom. We have seen every hope crushed, every expectation disappointed, and flowers and bright days seem to mock our sorrow. As their troops pass by hour after hour, how our hearts sink within us to think that they are going home triumphantly while we have lost all. Well, it is very hard to endure such misery patiently. I feel as if I could never forgive them for all they have done to us, the desolation, the grief all over our land. I cannot, she would write the next month, I cannot feel reconciled. My heart is so rebellious that instead of forgiving our enemies, I hate them more every hour of my life. Now, all of what I've shared with you tonight was real, vivid, compelling, and obviously deeply felt by those who wrote it. Every entry is a legitimate perspective on the experience of war in our region. But do remember this, as I said before, these diaries represent a very narrow perspective on this war. Others saw the war very differently and hoped for a very different end. And I'll close with a quote from Booker T. Washington, an enslaved child in 1865, who wrote of the end of the war from a different perspective. We were told that we were all free and couldn't go when and where we pleased, or could go when and where we pleased. My mother, who was standing by my side, leaned over and kissed her children while tears of joy ran down her cheeks. She explained to us what it all meant, that this was the day for which she had been so long praying, but fearing that it would never come. So history is a complicated thing. But that is a story for a different night. Thank you all very much. And it turns out that some of their siblings bought them from them. So they received the money, 2 of them did. The rest of them kept their enslaved people. And so at the end of the Civil War, the economic value of those enslaved people, which amounted to well over half of their inheritance from their father's will, was wiped away, except for those who chose to sell their people. I mean, there's not justice either way, but people were making decisions all over the place. I mean, there was a daughter in California who received 7 human beings as a bequest, which of course was not a possibility if you lived in California in 1860. Wow.
John, are any of these gonna be published, and are they online? Can you?
So Matilda's diary, as I said, there's scraps of it around. The scrap that we have in the park file is the worst transcription that you'll ever see. But I've gotten from the family the whole diary that exists. And I've been working with Rebecca Campbell-Light, who did a couple of books, and that one will be published. She's funding the publication through HF Apply, and that will be published hopefully later this year. But I started the project thinking I was going to fix up about 4 months of her diary, and then found another almost year of it. So it turned into a much bigger project than I planned. Jane Beale's diary is published. Betty Herndon Morey's diary has been published in the Fredericksburg Journal of History. Mary Caldwell's diary is published in the CBBT Fredericksburg and Biography Journal. Lizzie Alsop's diary has not been published, but it was edited as a master's thesis in 2013 by Andrew Talcott. And so the stuff is generally available and easy to get. But Matilda's has been kind of a love-hate relationship. So, and she has been the other woman in my life for a long time, way too long, I have to say. She has come with us on vacation and everything. So that's got to stop.
Are these, do you have any of the originals, like of these unpublished, or are you working a lot from transcription?
No, well, Matilda's, we have the transcription that the part got years ago was made from a horrible transcription, and it was only partial. But I got page images of the whole diary, so I've done the whole diary. Betty Herndon Morey's was published in 25 copies in 19-something. The original of that is at the Library of Congress. I've never looked at the original. Jane Beale's diary is owned by the Fredericksburg Area Museum, and you can go look at it. That is a good, solid transcription done 2011. Well, it was published earlier, but it was redone in 2011 by Historic Fredericksburg Foundation. And the transcriptions that appear in the CBBT Journal and the Fredericksburg HFFI Journal of Mary Caldwell for CBBT, and anyway, they're good transcriptions as well, and they were done from the originals. Yes.
I'm curious. The original. What did they write them in books, like actual?
So the creation of a diary is a very interesting thing. So there are hints in Matilda's that what she did was she compiled separately notes each week, and then she would write her diary entry. And she did it faithfully, and she would insert occasionally a nota bete, which is a PS basically, and add information that came to her knowledge after she had recorded her notes. And then she recopied the whole thing into very tidy paperback volumes that are probably 13 by 8 or so. So there's nothing in her diary that suggests that it's not authentic, that it is not generally written in the moment. Other diaries, I think Jane Beale's diary very clearly was recopied with corrections and enhancements later, in the form that Fredericksburg Area Museum has it today. So that's probably not what she wrote originally, but certainly very close. It has a sense of authenticity to it. Mary Caldwell's diary is almost illiterate and no question about its authenticity. Russ Smith, who edited that, deserved a medal for having worked through that one. They're still out there. They still emerge. And I think, some of them are worth sitting down and reading. I think Matilda's is worth sitting down and reading just because it's like, wow, there's just so much going on. If you're someone like me, I know pretty much everybody in town at the time of the Civil War. They're all familiar names to me. And so 90% of the people who visit her house, I met them somewhere along the line. And so that's really kind of interesting. There is it's one reason I don't have much of a social life. But it's an interesting question, how they're done, and they're all done differently. There are really very few, not very few, but the big diaries that you see, many of them are recopied because, writing in the field, and soldiers' diaries writing in the field. I mean, pocket diaries, yes, but the bigger ones, I think as often as not, they were probably recopied after the war. But generally speaking, I think people were pretty faithful about them. Yes?
When I think the Civil War, I think that was years and years ago.
Yes.
And what you're bringing to light, it is very contemporary. It is very now. It is very something I can relate to. So I think that's really interesting that you can make that come alive so many years later. So are you implying that there are contemporary issues today for the Civil War that took place a bazillion years ago?
That's a good question. Well, I will tell you, no. As I was kind of figuring out what I was going to do with this talk tonight, which I started to do last night. But I've been in this stuff for a long time. It's relevant in that you see people dealing with societal stresses and conflicts that are both very personal to them and whose root is beyond their reach or vision. And I would say that we today are dealing, no matter what your political view is, are dealing with many of the same things. We feel the turmoil in our country. And so I'm not suggesting any parallel with issues, things like that. But I hadn't thought of it that way, but I would be happy to say, yes, there are parallels in the human experiences as reflected. And I think if you hear these things or read these things, and you feel the way that you have responded tonight, then that's why we're here. For you to think about these things, because the human conditions of humanity have changed tremendously, but the human condition doesn't change that much. Thank you.
I hope you found this evening worth the while. And it's very hard for me, looking out here and knowing how many of you have helped and committed to history and to recognition of events that have taken place in this area. But we have our friends, our closest companion organization, the Friends of Momentous Battlefield, represented here, and we've shared with them and hope to continue to do that as we go on in the future. I haven't mentioned one of our board members I'd like to recognize too, Shannon Doherty over here. She is the director of Historic Germana too, and of course.
Don't tell my boss you said that.
Did I do something wrong?
I'm not the director.
Oh, okay. I just promoted you. And also we have representatives from the American Battlefield Trust here too. And I didn't get over to say hello to Christine Grubbs, right? here, right, am I right? Christine Gross. And maybe he's left now. Chuck Loudner. Yeah, oh, there you are, back there. Okay. Oh, we put you in the back row. Okay. Anyway, we're very glad to have you here as well. And we've already mentioned others who are actively participating in and preserving the history of our region. And we're just grateful to so many people here. And I also have to say, I'm happy that Tracy Nickel, a member of our Lake of the Woods Board of Directors, is here as well at table number 2.
Darcy Jennings is here too.
Oh, Darcy's here.
Oh my God.
Darcy
Oh,
Jennings.
Okay, yeah, Darcy Jennings. Back at table. How much do you expect a guy who's 79 years old? Anyway, apologies. And also Brian Nickel, our District 5 representative to the Orange County Board of Supervisors too. And so I probably missed a lot of other people, but sitting over here also in the corner outside of many of you is one of our original members and founders of the Civil War Study Group, Craig Brain, past president. Two more members of the Civil War Study Group's board, Boggs Wright, over here. Our vice president, Tom Rubik, here. And anyway, we hope that you've had a wonderful evening. Please leave as you wish and enjoy yourselves for a while too. There's plenty of time. And thanks so much again to everyone who's here tonight. Okay. Thank you.
Before you go, please remember to visit our website often, civilwarstudygroup.org. We make every attempt on a regular basis to provide informative content. Thank you for visiting, and God bless.